warm welcome to our listeners. This is the SciLang Podcast, where we're all about the holistic integration of languages into science and science into languages. My name is Agnieszka, and today I have the pleasure of hosting our guest, Dr. Francesca Citron, a lecturer at the psychology department at Lancaster University. Francesca is a psycholinguist and cognitive neuroscientist whose work focuses on the link between emotions and language. So grab something nice to drink and let's begin. Hello, Francesca.
Hello, Agnieszka.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So usually when we start our podcast, I ask my guest whether they can tell us what languages they speak and what made them choose to learn this language.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, by the way. My native language is Italian, and then I speak English and German fluently. I learned them in school, and then I use them for my profession. I lived in Germany and in the UK and in the US. I also speak Portuguese. I used to be fluent in Portuguese. I really loved it. And then I speak a bit of French, Spanish, and just a tiny bit of modern Greek.
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
So the reason why I learned them, sometimes it was like I learned them at school, but I still chose them. So I was interested in German, I was interested in French. I've always learned two languages in each of my schools. I've always chosen two languages instead of one, because I was interested and I liked them. So some of it is the education system, and some of it is passion. So Portuguese, I came across it and I liked the sound, and then eventually I really liked the language, so I decided to study it. Similarly with Spanish, I like the sound of the language, so I studied it. And modern Greek is more like I have an interest in the origin of words. So I had studied some ancient Greek many years ago because it was, it's a passion, an interest, in where the words come from. And then I also happen to, make friends with Greeks. One of my best friends is Greek. And so eventually I ended up learning some modern Greek as well. That's it. For fun.
I love that there are different ways for you, I guess. So on one hand, there was this passion, and on the other, there was also friends. I wonder if any of these languages, well, except Italian, was more for more pragmatic reasons, like work, or did you think that any of these languages were it was just good to know them?
So obviously English was compulsory at school, and obviously you choose it because you need it. Sometimes it's not even a choice. You can choose, but if you can choose, you always want to get English because it opens the world, the doors to the world for you. So obviously English for pragmatic reasons. I still like English as a language, but it's not something I chose out of passion. German, French and German, as I said, I chose them in school. So it was like the other option available on top of English was French in one school. So I chose it. And then in the next school, I could choose between German and French. So I decided to change. So interest, essentially. Pragmatism as well, because both French and German can be quite helpful. But then all the other languages just, for fun and passion and just to enjoy myself.
You said that Portuguese, you just loved the sound of it. Can you tell me more? And do you think that with other languages you had the same, or it's interesting to me also because when I was reading about your research,
Yes.
and the this idea of beauty in the language,
Yes.
I think this is the first time in the podcast when obviously people said that, oh, I was interested in that language, it was something, but you just said it sounded beautiful.
Yes. So basically, when I was 19, I went to Germany for a year. I did a year of voluntary service.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a small German village. And it was a very good experience, and my German became fluent. But then I met some immigrants or expats, whatever, however we want to call each other. So there was a Portuguese community, and they often were friends with Italians as well. And so I got exposed to this language, which initially sounded really, really harsh, because it sounds like the language used in the harbor, like very, very strong. But then by listening to it more and more, I realized how there's actually very nice connections of like the words change. You pronounce the words differently, so the sound of the words change a little bit depending on which other words are around. So you say so something can change to S or sh depending on which other letters are around. So it's really interesting and very, it sounds very, so it has some very melodic sounds. And so I really started to like it, and I got more and more curious. And so then I learned it. Obviously, this is my perception. Some people perceive it as very strong and they still don't like it, but I kind of started to like it more and more. Not all languages sound melodic. For example, French sounds really beautiful, but some people hate it because it's too feminine. So it's really a subjective thing, this story about beauty. Then German, I wouldn't say German sounds particularly beautiful or particularly melodic. But there's other things I like of German, and eventually I also like how it sounds. It's really subjective.
Just what's really, really interesting to me also what you just said, which I never heard before, is that you said that French sounds feminine. It's an interesting take on like looking at languages, like this personification of languages, and also looking through like a different lens of something that like through, I don't even know how to call it, like other than personification. Do you have that? Is that how you look at languages sometimes? I'm not saying that all the time, but is that a way you would think about languages?
It's not that I put them in categories. It's just French to me sounds very elegant, very sweet, and you know what I mean? It's like I would associate it more with femininity, So if you hear, if you see a big scary man, maybe you would not expect him to speak in French.
Yeah.
But this is only about French. That is my perception. And then another thing I want to tell you is with Spanish also sounds Spanish sounds really to me as an Italian, it sounds sexy, very similar to my language, but yet it's different. So it sounds very sexy. A friend of mine, an Italian friend of mine, said, I can't take Spanish seriously. It sounds like Italian, but modified Italian. It sounds like a joke. So I couldn't live in Spain because I would laugh all the time. So the similarity with your native language also has an effect somehow.
Yeah, that's true. I'm Polish, so for me, people who are from Czech Republic, it sounds so cute. It just because so cute, because when we have, in English we have words like cat and kitty, or dog and doggy, then like everything sounds like kitty. Like every single thing that they say to me sounds like they are saying something really, really, really cute.
Yes.
So you're right. It also depends on where you're from. But I love that idea. I love the idea of like thinking about language as because usually when I think about language is perhaps part of your culture or a tool to communicate with others, and this completely new idea that it's true, like when I think about language and I think about someone speaking a language, I have an idea in my head about the person that speaks that language, which is also
Yes.
very important. I don't think we talk about that enough, that it's connected.
Yeah.
Do you, because this is like many, many languages, do you find yourself like thinking in these languages or not really?
Yes, of course. I live in the UK, so I use English all the time. So I think most often in English because it's the language I use every day. But now, since my mom passed away, I talk to my dad almost every day at telephone.
Mhm.
So my Italian tends to be quite active now. So it tends to be a mixture, you know. I think in English, half a sentence in English, then in half a sentence in Italian. So these are the languages that I use mostly for thinking because they're the ones that I keep active. Yeah.
Mm. I'm very sorry, by the way.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just it wasn't like that before because when my mom was alive, I would call them once a week, you know. And now because
Mm.
he's on his own, I talk Italian more often. And
Mhm.
yeah, I also have a friend here from Romania with whom I talk in Italian because she lived in Italy. So I keep my Italian. My Italian is more active, and actually I have more interference at the moment. But it's good to keep your mother tongue alive as well. So.
Yeah, do you feel like you're losing it a little bit or not really? Yeah.
Yes, I mean many words they don't come up because obviously here I'm exposed to English all the time, so I'm
Mhm.
never passively exposed to Italian unless I watch a film in Italian, which doesn't happen very often. So I feel like often the words don't come to me, and I need to go to the dictionary, translate from English to Italian, and it's frustrating. I was talking to my dad the other day, and I couldn't find the word, so I explained the whole concept and then
Mm.
he understood. And then at the end of our conversation, it was like a seal for a rubber seal. And at the very end of the conversation, after, you know, after the topic was over,
Mhm.
he came up with the word. And I'm like, exactly, you know, and I couldn't think about it. So it's quite frustrating because yes, you are very good at a different language, but you're never going to be like a native speaker. And
Mhm.
yet you're not 100% in your native language either because you live abroad. So you speak, you know, but that's the advantage. You speak more languages, but they're not, they can't be perfect. So,
Yeah, that's yeah. I feel you. Unfortunately, I have exactly the same. And actually, this is maybe it would be a good time to ask you about your research a little bit because um, only a little bit. It just
yes,
I was actually interested in this idea that when it comes to beauty, uh, I remember in one of your talks I watched, you said that all these beautiful words that writers use,
yes,
um, they make the piece more beautiful.
yes,
You perceive it as more beautiful, um, but and if you just make it plain or simple, then it's easier to understand, but it's not as beautiful.
yes,
But there is this threshold, isn't it? There's threshold because the threshold between not understanding and um, perceiving it beautiful.
yes. I think it's a complicated matter. So in my research, I mean, some of my research, I'm looking at beauty perception when people read poems, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read a poem, there's different stylistic devices. For example, sound play like rhythm, meter, repetition. So there's, poets play with sound, but poets also play with meaning. So they use metaphors,
Mm-hmm.
exaggerations, and so on. And so these things make the poem more complex to read, but they also elicit this appreciation or beauty perception. So things sound more beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so obviously I have only investigated this with native speakers because native speakers have the
Ah, Okay.
have the native speaking intuitions.
Mm-hmm.
So if a second language speaker reads the poem, supposing they are fluent in that language, they will still get the benefit,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe they'll perceive things differently. Maybe some sounds that sound good, some repetitions or sounds that sound good to a native speaker don't sound as good in a second language speaker. And also in terms of meaning, poetry uses novel and creative metaphors. And they're up to interpretation. So it's nothing conventionalized in the language. So how is a native speaker going to interpret a novel metaphor? We don't know. But the second language speakers may show even more variability. They may use, they may have similar conventional metaphors in their native language. So we don't know what they will do. So I haven't investigated this with L2 speakers, but we plan to investigate this. Creative language use. Is it going to be more effective in native speakers, or are L2 speakers getting more benefits because they can take resources from two different languages? So it would be nice to investigate this in future. But going back to our languages, I think, with regards to the sound, the more, so if you don't understand a single word of the language, then you can really appreciate the melody and the sounds. Once you speak that language to a certain level, then you lose that because it becomes meaningful. So that's a real shame. This is not related to my research, but it's related to this beauty that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a very good observation, definitely. So let's speculate right now, I guess, a little bit. So, in your opinion, when we think about the future of the language translation tools,
Yes.
do you think there should be like a beauty button that you make it sure that the phrase that you want to translate, it's not only understandable, but it's also as beautiful as
Yes.
the...
Yes. So, okay, there is a research showing that, for example, figurative language engages readers and listeners more strongly at the emotional level. Some of my research as well. Conventional metaphors, novel metaphors, a bit of everything. So when we use rhetorical devices such as metaphors, readers and listeners perceive the language as more beautiful, or they get more engaged, more persuaded, okay, when you use these devices. Now, if we go back to your question, when it comes to translation, there's different ways of translating things. And there are a few studies out there that showed when something, for example, Spanish metaphors are translated into English or the other way around. When the translation preserve the metaphors, so maybe they translated with different metaphors, but preserve the figurative elements, metaphorical elements, then participants were more emotionally engaged. They showed more physiological responses, stronger physiological responses, compared to the translations that were in plain literal language. That's one of the disadvantages of translation. I mean, you can translate things in many different ways. That's why translators are key, because they're humans. There's different ways to translate things, and then a translation that makes things easier and very clear does not necessarily have the same rhetorical effects, because if you translate in simpler terms, then you lose some of these rhetorical advantages. But then obviously when it comes to translating books and stuff, often it's really difficult to translate some idioms or some specific expressions. So translators need to decide, am I going to be truthful to the very literal meaning? Am I going to choose a different type of idiomatic or metaphorical expression in the target language, which is not exactly the same, but it still gives you a rhetorical advantage? Or do I want to be truthful to the meaning and just translate it literally because that metaphor doesn't exist? So there's many choices to be made. But obviously, if we want to engage readers and listeners, we should try and translate, try and preserve these stylistic devices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope I'm making some sense.
No, yes, it's just it's fascinating what you're saying. It's just I never thought about it this way. So, like, obviously we are, as you said, we are humans. So when we communicating there are emotions, it's just this link between emotions and language, and how you talk about it. It's just yes, exactly. Just I never thought about it. So that's do you think that the fact that you know so many languages, or particular languages, does it help in your work? Like, but I guess I'm asking about both your work, your research, but also you as a researcher, like in
Yes.
general.
Yeah. So in my research, that's the easiest answer. In my research, yes, because by studying language comprehension, I can. It's easier to so for me, I have, when I prepare the linguistic stimuli, so texts or sentences or single words for my experiments, because I study how people process language live. Okay, so how they understand. So I need linguistic stimuli for my experiments. So I can prepare linguistic stimuli in several languages. I have intuitions into several languages. I can come up with, I can have better intuitions on which linguistic phenomena are better investigated in that language or a different one, because I have an intuition. I know about the grammar and the meaning and so on. So it definitely helps in my immediate research to some extent. In terms of work more generally, obviously I'm an academic, so I always work in very international environments, and we know that the language of science is English. So I don't desperately need to speak other languages than English. Everything goes well with English. But obviously, if you work as an academic in Germany, the Netherlands, or wherever, it does help to speak the language of the country, both in terms of integration in the country, but also professionally, because if your colleague, well, you can understand the system better if you speak the local language, and your colleagues would appreciate that you speak the local language. And then when you become more and more senior, eventually you will need to speak the local language to some extent. When for my job, obviously, every time I change job, I also change country and language. And the fact that I was speaking the language of that country, so I got job offers in Italy at some point. I got job offers in Germany at some point. Whether I took them or not is a different story. But definitely the fact that I spoke the language of that country helped in the selection. It was not the deciding factor, but it did help.
Yeah. I remember when I talked to Professor Mark Gigan, like our conversation was also kind of in that sense similar, because I remember he said that he would always look on whether people spoke other languages, not only just not to use it, but just to see if people are courageous enough to go abroad to learn a language, because you have to also, as a scientist, I guess you have to have this a mind of explorer.
Yes.
Otherwise it's going to be hard, right?
Yes. I mean, you can be a very good scientist without speaking other languages. There are famous linguists who are monolingual. But I think speaking several languages opens your mind. It gives you access to different cultures, and if you only speak one, and you're a native English speaker, you never need to learn different languages. You can be very successful. It's just a shame for you because you don't have, you're always immersed into this Anglo-Saxon kind of like culture. So yeah, unfortunately, there's no direct benefit. It's not that multilinguals are more successful than monolinguals.
Yes, of course. But I actually wanted to ask you one thing that I think I asked each of my interviews, because this is something that I'm very interested in, is this idea about, well, not idea, but the fact that we, as a scientist, we are kind of bound to use English in our work. So I'm going to be a little bit cheeky right now, but do you think it's liberating because we can, communicate, and right now I can talk to you in English? Or do you think it is kind of like a restriction?
Yes. Okay, so it's definitely something really helpful because, in science we have this common language, and this facilitates, relationships, collaborations. We have a common science, a common language, so the whole literature is accessible to everyone. So if I publish something in an Italian scientific journal, only Italians can access it. So with English, it's free access. Everyone has access if you publish in English. So obviously it's a huge advantage. So we've agreed on one language, and that's really, really helpful. So it's mostly an advantage. On the other hand, so for us non-English native speakers, we get more of an insight into, we get more immersed in these Anglo-Saxon cultures, whichever it is. So we get enriched in a way because we learn about a culture, one of the cultures that is different from our own. So in a way, it's enriching, but also, but then having this common means to communicate then kind of like kills cultural diversity in some ways. So that's the disadvantage, that then Anglo-Saxon cultures are better represented out there. Everyone adapts to, the if there is something like that. I say cultures in the plural because, there's American, UK, Canadian, Australian, but so there's different ones, but they have something in common. And then somehow the other cultures that are not, that don't use English are less and less represented. So that's the shame.
I guess my last question is, because you speak so many languages and it's incredible, but I guess for me it's very interesting what it means to speak so many languages. I don't speak so many languages, only a couple of them, but do you feel like it's part of your own personality?
Yes. So when you learn another language and you get to a certain level of proficiency, or even not proficiency, but if you are immersed in that culture because you live in the country, it changes you. Okay, it changes you because you get exposed to a different culture, a different way of thinking, a different way of living, and this changes you. So you become a different person. So you're still going to, I'm still Italian, blah, 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 blah. But I've got some, I moved to Germany when I was 19. So I got really, it's like my second home country. Germany, I consider it my second home country. And I'm emotionally attached to German as well. And so, I'm not saying, I'm German, obviously I'm Italian, but some elements of that culture changed me and I carry them with me, so to say. And so, I think I lost your question again.
It was whether you think of any of the languages that you speak, that it is a part of your identity.
Yeah, it changes you, and so it becomes part of your identity. Yes, I think so. And then with Portuguese, obviously I haven't worked or lived in Portugal for a long time, but I met, I was in touch with this Portuguese community, and then I went there for 3 weeks one summer. So I was really immersed in the local culture, and I don't know, I think it enriched me. And obviously this was a long time ago, so my Portuguese connections are my affective connection to Portuguese is, back in the past. I never ever used this language, but yes, I think yeah, it changed something, and I have these cultural elements are within me. Maybe they're hidden at the moment. So yeah, it definitely changes your person in some ways. Yeah.
Do you think that, I don't know if you can actually put it like in one bucket or like even differentiate between them, but do you think that languages that you have learned, do they have like a similar or different way of influencing you when it comes to Italian? Like comparing it to Italian?
I am more aware of things that are specific to the Italian culture now. Because, you leave your home country, live abroad, and then you realize, oh, actually, those things that for me were like basic are actually culture specific. For example, one of the first thing I experienced when I went abroad was jokes. The jokes translated from Italian wouldn't work. They don't, they don't have the same sense of humor. And some jokes are based on specific cultural norms. So they would make sense in your culture, not in a different one. So I'm more aware of what's specific Italian. And I realize, I can take a step back and say, okay, this is specific Italian, and I think it's good. It makes sense to me. This other stuff is specific Italian, and I think is a bit weird. So, I discount that. And, there's things about my culture that I find less helpful, or I like them less. And so, yeah, I go a different way, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's actually a lovely idea to finish with. That I also didn't think about it this way, but it's true, as you said, that when you're learning new language and you are immersed in different culture, you can actually learn more about your culture, because you can, as you said, step back and see who you are and where you come from.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So thank you so much for this conversation. It was very, very interesting. This was the SciLang Podcast. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka.